What's up, y'all? Y'all are listening to Living Corporate's flagship podcast. If you didn't know, Living Corporate helps organizations build employee engagement and market trust through data analytics and data transformation, our e-learning platform, and brand marketing storytelling. We're so excited for you to be here today. The conversation you're about to hear is going to connect the dots between employee experience and go-to-market effectiveness. If you're not ready, get ready. Here we go. Daisy, welcome to the show. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Listen, I'm glad that your team reached out. You know, we had been talking about it offline. I'm going to say it here, though, because people don't always get a peek behind the curtain. I've actually been trying to get you on the pod for a while, like back when you was at Vice. So I'm excited to have you here.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here. And you should know that I came across your podcast because I had a team pull up some of the podcasts that would seem most aligned with my work and what I do. And yours was in the top 50.
Well, I'm flattered by that. You know what I'm saying? Now, top 50, we got some work to do because I want you to say like top 3. So I'm going to keep on pushing.
Oh, well, yes. I don't know what number it was, but I know that it was in that top.
Received. No, I'm teasing. So listen, when I first came into awareness of you, you had just became the chief people officer of Vice. And I'm biased because I think it's interesting we're having this conversation now because when you joined Vice, I was really excited I just thought that was so cool because as a brand, like externally as a brand, I just thought that they were like one of the few like real countercultural voices, like telling really authentic stories, the documentaries specifically, those who know, the documentaries are genuinely differentiated, just very honest and raw in a way that, just completely different, right? And how they capture stories and tell, just how they tell stories. And then though, right, I think it was like earlier this year or last year, Vice shut down, but not only did it shut down, like the library is gone. And like we're seeing this pattern of libraries or archives being deleted, right? Like this concept of the internet being a forever place is kind of being challenged right in front of our eyes, right? But anyway, like that was really like a whole segue because I just found that like the timing of our interview, you being advice, being here, is just like it's so eerie because I want to say they did the same thing with I think Comedy Central and MTV. Have you been seeing that too?
I haven't found. I mean, I have a lot of my old former colleagues. I used to work at Viacom, and with a lot of the changes that have been happening, really, quite frankly, all across media and entertainment with consolidation, mergers, buyouts. There's a shifting tenor and practice that is worrisome, and hopefully we'll continue to have these voices and journalists who are speaking truth to power and creating spaces for audiences that deserve to be informed and spoken to in truth in a way that is not varnishing, right? And also that is what I loved about Vice most was that it created a space for voices that were not being celebrated and recognized in other outlets. And so I hope that spaces like that do continue to open up.
So like, I bring up Vice not just to talk about like this meta narrative or commentary discussion on media and digital and all this stuff, but really because that's when I first came into awareness of you. That was back in like 2020. Talk to me about what has become clearer for you as like a people leader, as an executive, as a voice, as a workplace equity advocate, like since that season, right? Because it feels like 2020 feels like 10 years ago. And at the same time, it feels like last week. So like, talk to me about your kind of like where you're at since then.
So much, Zach, to your point. I mean, we are all still reeling from the pandemic and the racial and social unrest of the summer of 2020. I joined Vice on May 15th of 2020. At the beginning of the pandemic, I had never met my boss, my team, anyone in person.
Wow.
Right. So I was one of that first wave. Now that's really common to a lot of people, but I was one of, those first waves of folks that we were all just trying to figure out how does this work? How do you onboard talent into organizations virtually, and at such fragile times, and I say that knowing that we still live in fragile times. But 2 weeks later, George Floyd was murdered. And that ignited an awakening, if you will, not just in organizations, but across the world. And if you were in the media and entertainment space, you were, that also ignited a space for employees to start speaking truth to power about their experiences in the workplace, right? It was like the whole world was talking about this atrocious thing that had happened to George Floyd. And then people started connecting the dots between the experiences of Black people and people of color and underrepresented individuals across different realms of society, including the workplace. And it was, I've always said this, that it felt like being at the right place at the right time for me, because I had spent decades of my career building diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives, right? And and I know that there's so much talk about this right now, but fundamentally, what I felt, and what I believed my role to be in these organizations was about creating access and opportunity for underserved communities that had been sidelined and marginalized historically in institutions that were not created with us in mind. And I had the honor and privilege and deep responsibility to try and get that work done within systems that were incredibly challenging. And so you said, you asked what's happened since then. Well, in that summer, I think a lot of us who are practitioners in this space, we thought we could breathe a little bit in many ways, right? We were all reeling from the pain and the anguish, but also having done this work, we thought oh, well, maybe now, right? Maybe now that there is all of this attention, on this, maybe now that organizations are trying to do things, right? They weren't all doing the right things. Advice, I was an advocate for pausing, right? Not for doing all the things, right? Everybody was putting out lists of all the things they're doing so that they could get their employees, happy and, really to appease them and calm them down, right? And, from a, public relations perspective. And I just wanted to, figure out, what did our employees need, right? Let's just pause and figure out, what is it that they need? Let's hear from them. Let's gather that information, and then we can put forth a strategy. And we did that. We did the listening tours like everybody else. We collected data, and and not surprisingly, a lot of the information that came back to us was the same information that I had seen in company after company, and that we were reading about and hearing about. Folks want to pay equity, right? They wanted to be paid fairly. Who doesn't, right? Sometimes the data they were using was, misconstrued and their strategies were wrong, but everybody wants to be paid fairly. That was great. People wanted to know what it took to advance. What does it take to grow in this organization? And if you don't have an infrastructure that allows folks to clearly understand what it takes to go from one level to the other, well, that becomes problematic, right? So that's the work there, right? People wanted to feel respected and valued by their managers. Well, I was if you're not training managers in the complex and intricate work of managing humans in all of their complexity, well, then there's some work there, right? So we set about to do the unsexy work, right? Which was to create job architecture and job leveling, management training, communications efforts that were not just about the PR piece, but about helping explain to people and helping equip managers and leaders to do their work, right? I would often say, from a KPI perspective, and it's a very generic KPI for sure, but my goal was to ensure that managers were managing and leaders were leading, right? If we got that right, that would have been tremendous. So that's a lot of what was happening that summer. And during that summer and fall and winter, I was writing my first book, Inclusion Revolution, and it was crazy, right? They were all these things were happening, but it was what I love about writing and doing the work that I do is that for me, work is my field study, right? This is where I figure out the things, what works, what doesn't. I fail all the time, right? And how do I pick myself up and figure this out? And how do I help the people that I manage, the people that I lead, get to the other side safely, right? Like that's the work. And so during that time, I was writing this and I was working full time. It was all the things. And I believed that this rallying cry was going to be the cry that was going to save us, that we could use that energy, right? To quote an awful quote, but it's very true, right? Don't let a good crisis go to waste, right? It's just like, how did we leverage this for good and sustainability, right? Because for me, it wasn't about like, let's get this right now. You and I have been working for years, right? And like, I want this to have generational staying power, right? I want this to last. And we believed it did. And, several years later, unfortunately, we are in a place that most movements tend to be, right? Which is, every movement has its backlash. Every movement has its ebbs and its flows. And, the diversity and inclusion space throughout my entire career has had its highs. Everybody gets excited about it, right? And then financial, usually it's there's a financial crisis that happens. And then all of a sudden everybody stops thinking about it. And then the economy starts improving and everyone starts talking about it, right? It's the standard ebbs and flows. I think the one that we're in now is a particularly challenging one because it is not just solely driven by economy, but it's also driven by a highly politicized political environment. It's a highly divisive political environment that is allowing a lot of the loud voices that don't believe in truth, right? That don't believe in dignity, right? Allowing them to be a lot louder than the other voices that I believe are actually doing the good work. So I think we're in that in between. I hope I answered your question.
You did. And it's a pod. So you're doing great. Let's keep going. So so it's interesting to your point about the cyclical nature, the almost like a sound wave. That's kind of like, that's the nature of this space, right? Whether you call it employee experience, workplace fairness, DEI, JEDI, whatever you want to call it. Yes. It comes, there's ebbs and flows, there's waxes and wanes. I'm not sure if you saw, but in the fallout of, I'm going to keep calling it a kerfuffle, all right, Trump's last rally. Because I'm trying to figure it out, Daisy. I'm trying to get all the facts, right? But I do know, irrespective of your leaning or what you think may happen, I do believe kerfuffle is a fair word. Plus, I like saying it's a fun word to say. Anyway, a fallout from this at the last rally, Tim Burkett on Fox News, he actually, like, in real time blames, like, a quote unquote DEI person for the debacle, right? And like, this is the latest, right? Like, in a pattern of talking heads turning DEI into some type of slur that applies to anyone that isn't white, sure, straight, male, and evangelical. Noted, evangelical. You just talked about, like, remembering what 2020 felt like, what it was, the work that you were doing, and even before that, to your point, like, this, you have been here before. Like, when I talk to particularly seasoned HR leaders and people leaders, I talk to them about, I ask them about like past publicized traumatic situations, right? George Floyd was not the first. Like, I've talked to leaders who were HR executives when Rodney King was beaten, right?
Oh gosh. Oh.
Right. And so it's not like the first. It's easy to kind of get caught up and think it's the only, but it's not, right? And not to say that technology doesn't make it different, but I'm just saying it's not the first. So as you were in the midst of the season that you just described, did you see any of this coming? Like, did you see this degree of backlash, this degree of animus, this degree of like obfuscation? Did you anticipate any of that?
Well, I'll begin by saying to your earlier point about this person decrying that it is all the fault of a DEI person. I was like, they're on script, right? That's their script.
Right.
It doesn't have to make any sense, and it doesn't,
Right.
right?
Right.
But they just have to say it and say it loudly, right? Like that's what they've been told to do, and so that's what they're doing. And that's what I think about that, right? It's ridiculous. We know it, and I've said this before. Blaming DEI professionals for anything that's happening in society is like blaming the weatherman for it to be raining, right? Like there is no direct correlation, but they're on script. That's their thing, and it's laughable at best. But to answer your question, no, I did not. I always expected backlash. I'm always ready for the backlash because I've seen it time and again. And, I write about this. I talk about this, right? Whenever there's any kind of change towards, readjusting the power dynamics, because let's face it, all of this is about power, right? There will be backlash from those who feel entitled to the power, and will fight for it. So I've always expected the backlash. The legal losses that we faced, those have been particularly painful because, and again, I should not be surprised because that's been in the making. And if anybody is in the movement space, from a social movement perspective, right? Like there are people far more brilliant than you and I who have been working on this for years, right? I served on the board of Planned Parenthood, and the Dobbs decision, as awful and painful as it was, there were teams that had been on the ground with advocacy work and had been following this, and legal teams that knew this was coming. So it wasn't a surprise, right? Although you will fight to the bitter end, right, to make it not so. So that wasn't a huge surprise. It's a disappointment because we have fought so hard to build rights that are for everybody, right? Like this isn't about usurping someone's humanity and dignity. It's actually about bringing that about for a broader set of humans who have not received those benefits and that access and that opportunity. And so I wasn't surprised. It's the legal ones that have been most painful because, to be clear, we can win that back, right? I do believe this is not the end, right? I have a 16-year-old daughter, and God knows that I will do anything I can to ensure that she has agency over her body and that she has the same rights, if not more, than what I have had throughout my life. And a lot of women fought for me to have those rights, and I will do what I need to do for her and for other women as well. And I'm not alone, right? So I gain hope and optimism in knowing that what we're hearing is all of this noise, and we think that's the majority, but there are so many others that are fighting for truth and for dignity and for humanity. And that's the side of history that I want to be part of.
I love that, Daisy. I mean, and to the last point you made, I have 2 young daughters myself, 19 months and 4, right? So I know, and I think about their world every day, right? Just like, okay, man, what am I leaving behind? And like, what am I going to do? Right. When they, at least, and I think like, it's just so wild because it's like, they're going to ask you. I talk to people about this with kids. I'm like, your kid's going to ask you, like, when they look at the history book or history tablet or history hologram, I don't know. They're going to go, hey, you were alive back then? What was it like back then? What did you do? Because I know I ask my grandparents all the time, hey, what did you do? Like when these freedom rides were happening, like, how did you feel about it? And like, did you want to go? And like, I mean, we have those conversations. I want to keep going because we got some more to go, Daisy. Okay.
Let's talk.
All right, let's get going. When you stepped away from Vice Media, I remember your public statement talking about taking time for yourself, and pretty much like any communications I saw from you online at that time had to do with rest.
Yes.
When did you realize that it was time for you to step away and recenter yourself on rest?
I think most of us realize it when we need it, but we don't accept and acknowledge it.
Yeah.
So I will say that it was a series of realizations. It was a series of moments with my body giving up and my body telling me, "You're done. You can't do that. This isn't just a typical cold. This isn't just long COVID. This is it, right? This is sustained stress, chronic stress, and you need." Right. And I had many, medical practitioners and other experts tell me that, and you keep on going. And in part, you keep on going, as a woman of color, as an immigrant. It's, this is what we do, right? So we just keep on putting one foot in front of the other. You are doing it for your team, you're doing it for your family, right? You're trying to keep a roof over your heads, you're trying to figure out what the next step is. But in many ways, one of the many lessons I've learned is that you also do it for yourself, and not for the right reasons all the time, right? There's an ego that goes in. I'm like, I can do this, right? I can rise above this. I can hang with the big guys. I can do all of that. And, and eventually, with the help of my wonderful executive coach, Ra Goddess, my husband, my family, my friends, I came to the realization, I'm like, it doesn't have to be this way. But I'm going to have to do something drastically different in order for it to change, right? And so I had made my decision to leave Vice, and as I was making that decision, it was a very pragmatic one, right? I was like, my contract ends this time. And so at this point, I will move on, and I will now, and I am, again, very pragmatic. I'm an operator, right? So I was like, what is that going to look like? Is it going to be 6 months? What am I going to do at first? And, I was like, and at first I'm going to do nothing, right? Because I just need to rest, right? And what am I doing this for, right? So finding intention and purpose in the time, not just like I'm going on vacation, but what does this mean? So I spent a lot of time laboring over the intent and the purpose of this time off. And, and as life would have it, several curveballs came my way, right? We filed for bankruptcy. Well, I no longer, would have a contract or a severance to fall on. There were business needs that needed to be met. There were different emergencies as opposed to every other emergency I've been dealing with for years that needed to be addressed. So, then there was okay, so how long can I stay, right? How long can I extend it? What does that look like? And so I was able to design it partly, right? Because again, like I said, there was always a curveball that would come and be like, oh, I can't do it today. And I kept on pushing back, right? And I ended up leaving about 3 months later than I had originally estimated,
Okay.
but left. And I frankly wasn't going to post or write about it. One of the things I wanted to do was actually kind of go dark and quiet. That had been my original intention. But as things would go, Vice, as it was the beauty of working for a company of journalists, also had a double-edged sword, right? And news got leaked, right? And and so my goodbye note, which was an honest note to the company, and I didn't use the standard like I am going to go off to pursue different endeavors, and right, I was just like, I'm taking a radical sabbatical, right? Like I'm just like, this is what I'm doing. It got leaked, and I started getting like some negative backlash of like, who is she? What does she think she's doing? And so I woke up the next day and said, you know what? No, I'm going to own this. This is my story. This is not somebody else's story to shame me or to shame others about asking for the space and the time and the energy that they need. And so I wrote this piece, shared it on LinkedIn, and the response was bananas. Like I sent it and I braced myself. There was a moment of, I just sent this and I'm just like, oh my gosh, did I just put myself right on the firing lane, and people are just going to start humiliating me for saying this? And it was the opposite, Zach. I had publicly and behind the scenes hundreds and hundreds of people reaching out going like, you have no idea how much that spoke to me. You have no idea. And I heard from folks who had their unprompted sabbaticals, right? So the many people who had been laid off in the past year and ended up having to do one, without wanting to, but then midway through it realizing, oh, this is the biggest gift that has happened to me, right? So I had the people who realized that. I had the people like me that had been intentional. I had the people that were in between. I had people reaching out to me going like, I want one. How do I do it? Right? I had all of that. And that just sparked in me this interest in, to your point, documenting about what rest and replenishment looked like for me. And it wasn't just for me, right? Some of my posts were because I was talking to people. I wasn't formally interviewing people, but every conversation, like I said, was my field study, was like a podcast conversation, right? Like this conversation. Yeah. And so I would ask, are you okay if I share this publicly? Because I'm starting to write this, and some people said yes, some people said no, and then I started sharing it, and the response was beautiful. And I write and I share what I do because I just have this deep desire to share my learnings, right, and to connect with people, because I have seen myself in so many other people's stories. And so if I can help somebody, if I can spark an idea in somebody, if I can help light someone's day, that's all it takes for me. And every week, my radical sabbatical chronicles were, people were loving it. They wanted me to write a book about it. I'm like, that's wild. I may someday, but I really didn't even think that, because I felt like I'm not a sabbatical expert. There are sabbatical experts. Right. There were people that were actually writing these books that I also was able to amplify, and I was really excited about. But I was like, that's not even my thing. Like, this is a moment in time that I need for me. And part of the generative piece and the nourishing piece. So I had, during my sabbatical, I wrote about this. I would only do things if they matched two out of three criteria. Is it restful? Is it generative, and is it nourishing? And if it wasn't any of those threes, then I wouldn't do it. If it was 2 out of 3, then I would consider. If it was 3, then it was a slam dunk, right? And writing my weekly little column on LinkedIn, if you will, that was nourishing, and it was generative because it sparked more ideas and more thinking. So I loved it, and it was an opportunity for me. So it was an opportunity for me to also share how I went about it, what I thought about. So a lot of what I just shared with you now, but also a lot more detail of, it took this. I asked myself these questions. I made sure that my family was going to be okay financially, right? Like all of the things that we need to be honest about, I put out there.
Yeah, I mean, it was incredible to read and experience as a consumer, for lack of a better word. And it had me pause and think about, and actually before I go there, let me say this. Something you said earlier about, your body will tell you, or, your body, you feel sick, or, you're like more stressed or reactive to things. And we've had other guests, various like therapists and psychologists, psychiatrists, just talking about the idea that the body keeps the score, right, of the stresses and things that you internalize.
Oh yeah, and, absolutely.
And but also, like, to your point, and you mentioned about you being an immigrant. Like, I would love to hear more perspective on that, because I think about myself as a Black American, first generation corporate professional, first man to start and graduate from before university on my mom's side. My dad taught my grandfather how to read. So like, I carry a lot. Like there's a lot of things that I've persevered through where I probably should have stepped back, but I kept pushing through because I felt like, well, no, I'm not gonna, like, I'm carrying a legacy. I'm carrying responsibility. I'm carrying my last name. I have this, I have that. So you internalize a lot of these things, right? Like, I would imagine there's an additional degree of dimensionality as it pertains to being an immigrant to this country as well. Like, you mentioned that. Would you mind sharing a little bit more about that?
Sure. And, I wouldn't say that it's more than the weight that you're carrying. It's just, it's a different way, because it's based on my lived experience as an immigrant whose family worked immensely hard to send me to the best schools they possibly could so that I could be prepared to come to the United States and study, right? There was always a plan for me that, I should say, because when I speak of being an immigrant, I have a unique immigrant status. I was born in New York City, but I was raised in the Dominican Republic. And then I moved to the United States when I was a junior in high school. So there's a lot of privilege that comes with that because I already had an American citizenship. But I also, and I was speaking to somebody earlier about this, I was very much of an immigrant. I remember going to, I moved here my junior year of high school, New Milford, New Jersey. And I remember walking the hallways of that school and feeling like everything was so different to me. And I did not know how to navigate it. I did not understand it, right? What felt comfortable to me was the class, right? Because that's what I would be learning, right? So if I was in history class, I'm like, I'm good, right? I'm like, I know how to be a good student. I know how to answer questions, but the whole concept of even the dynamics, right? Like this is behavioral shifts that you notice. The schools that I went to in the Dominican Republic, right? We raised our hand. We didn't just yell out at the teacher, right? We showed respect, right? And you better believe I needed to show respect because if I was disrespectful in that class, not only would I get in trouble, but that teacher knew my grandmother and she would go and tell my grandmother that I had been disruptive in class, right? Like that didn't happen in New Milford, New Jersey. Like the high school kids would be talking all around me and everywhere. And I'd be like, is this acceptable behavior in a classroom? Right? Is this what America is about? Like these are, so I went through that experience. I also went through the experience of growing up as a Dominican Puerto Rican woman in Santo Domingo. And while I went to an international school, I was part of the majority in the island, right? When I left my school, I could speak Spanish, right? I could, everywhere that I went, people, for the most part, looked like me, right? Spoke like me, engaged like me. Then I come to the States and that is the opposite of it. And not only that, I am placed in this box of being a Hispanic and a Latina, right? And that box seems to be defined by somebody else, not me, right? And they're telling me what they feel and think about me. So for me, the immigrant experience carries that of having to deal with that weight of who identifies me and how, which is also as I learned, and this is what I learned in college as I started educating myself on race and class issues in the United States. I was like it's not that different from my Black colleagues and my Black students, friends, right? Like you've carried a very different weight that you've carried it for a lot longer than I have, right? I'm just discovering this. You have grown up in neighborhoods where people have made you feel less than, for quite some time. So it was understanding that dynamic. And to our point earlier about the moment that we're living in and what role we want to play. And for me, realizing that the role I wanted to play was about creating a better experience for all of these humans who were not feeling seen, heard, and valued. And so that's part of the weight. And then the other weight is that weight of knowing that I am my family's highest dreams and achievement, right? Like this is, I've always loved, the quote, I am my ancestors' dreams, right? Like I can look at my ancestors and know what dream, right? Like literally, like my grandmother, this is the dream she had for me, and I'm living it, and I'm the oldest by quite a bit from the cousins in my family, but and my brothers are 28 and 25, right? They're these young guys that are just brilliant and doing such good work in the world, right? But to see that what I did also created space for them to be able to do what they're doing, and they're going to do far more than I ever did. But it is that I've never felt it as a weight, but it is a weight. And I say that because I always get asked the question of like, what's the weight of doing? And I was like, yeah, it's a pressure that we put on ourselves. But to me, it's always been, this is what I aspire to be, because this is how I give back to the people who poured so much on me.
Yeah.
But we can't deny the fact that in our inner recesses of our heads and our hearts, that is sometimes the message that makes us push through in moments where we actually should just pause and just rest.
First of all, what you're sharing is just so beautiful. And I know that like my parents, right? Like they invested in me. My mom invested in me with hopes and expectations that I would do things. I think it's different as an immigrant because in so many ways you are like the living deposit that your family has placed their dreams on, or you're the walking dream. You're the dream and the deposit of something brighter in the future. Yeah. And so then it's like, and like most people, when they the pressure of that, like there's beauty in that, like true. There's also a lot of pressure in that too, though. And so then to your point, like when it's a really late night and you've already been working like 9-10 hours and you're dealing with being like micro or macro aggressed, or you feel like, hey, this is like the umpteenth time someone's taking credit for your work, and you go to HR and they don't help you.
I just said that. Yes.
And like these moments when they just continue to compound on each other. Even when you try to like these things, right? Like trying to negotiate a raise or trying to understand why you didn't get promoted in the same way that this other person got promoted who took your work, right? So there's like, and like those moments, like they grade over time. And so like, I fully receive that. And, you know, it's interesting because LivingCorporate, like we've interviewed hundreds of leaders. I mean, Daisy, like, I think I'm looking at like 1,000 podcast episodes, like plus.
Wow, that's amazing.
A majority of them in like the employee experience HR space. And what I've learned anecdotally, and maybe it's not so anecdotal because the sample size is pretty significant, that burnout is a feature and not a bug, right? Especially for Black and brown folks, especially for Black and brown women, because of the way that racism, sexism, the patriarchy, and just corporate American capitalism is set up. So as I think about your book, which we've not delved into, we'll give you space to plug it because I know it's coming up later this year. How do you propose that this group of people who is so constantly overworked, underpaid, and undersponsored find rest?
Oh, goodness. We can't be good to anybody if we do not find rest. That is fundamentally it. It is a lived experience of leading through change and racism and misogyny and xenophobia and all the things, right? All the things that we know exist in organizations. I have lived through it, seen it, felt the pain. I have had my voice diminished, my ideas questioned, even my worth questioned on a daily basis. And even as I was trying to bring more seats to the table, I had to desperately hold on to my own seat, right? And it's the cognitive dissonance of trying to do that, and the challenges that come with that, and the struggles of holding on to your values and your purpose while you're just also trying to survive. It is all of that, and it is recognizing that trying to change that, forget trying to change it, just trying to live through that is exhausting, and trying to be a change agent in that space is depleting. And the only way that we can continue to drive this fight, right, to elicit the change that I believe is possible, that means that we have to get right within, right? Thank you, Lauryn Hill. This is right. This is what's critical. It's the name of one of my chapters. Is the name of the book of my dear friend Minda Harts, and it was like, because it's real. We have to heal ourselves. We have to be at our best so that we can do our best for others, and that we can create space for others to be their best. And so that's why I wrote Burnt Out to Lit Up, is because I haven't been burnt out. I've been burnt crispy, Zach, right?
I
have been just pick me here and I'm just disappearing.
Yeah.
But to your point, it was not just that burnout is a feature, not a bug, and it's so true. It was also me recognizing that burnout was not the only solution. That for some reason I had, in the deep recesses of my mind, convinced to myself that the price of doing all this work was to sacrifice myself, right, my heart, my spirit, to get it done. And it was the realization that no, that's all wrong, because I can't be good to other people if I'm not being good to myself. I cannot be good to my loved ones, my family, right? My friends, my community, the people that I serve at work, right? I cannot do what I am meant to do in this world if I am constantly depleted. And so that's what sparked my commitment, and why we can do that, right? It's, and Audre Lorde's quote is often, it's often used, right? Self-care is, it's an act of, sorry, I'm going to get her quote wrong. Self-care is, oh goodness, I'm gonna mess it up. I gotta pull it up.
Self-care is an act of resistance.
Resistance, that's it. Self-care is an act of resistance. It is an act of resistance, and it is also necessary, right? It is necessary. And the resistance comes in, and she's got a much longer quote that I will not even dare to say now because I'm not going to know it, but that's the only line that ever gets quoted. But what she's speaking to is the necessity for us to not, it's not just about resisting others so that we can survive. It's so that we can do the work, right? It's so that we can be there fully ourselves, fully healed. And healing is a process. It's not a destination, right? It takes time. And so that the why have the audacity to fight against burnout and to find a space to rest and to find a space to replenish? Because why not? Why not me be healthy and thriving and joyful while I am fighting for the change that we all deserve?
I love that. And for context, for those listening in, it's the quote, caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It is self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare. And I 100% agree, right? That I think the truth of the matter is that you have to find time for rest, because if you don't, you're just not going to be here. I mean, Daisy, I remember, so I'm coming from, my whole career is really in HR, org change, transformation. So I've worked at I worked as an HR manager, HR business partner. Then I was in consulting, where I'm working at Accenture and PwC and Capgemini, these big consulting firms. And those who know that consulting is corporate America on super speed, right? It's it's super aggressive. And I just remember at a point, it was man, I got to have a job, but I also got to be here. I got to live. I have to actually be alive. If I don't make some changes, I'm not going to be here. And so, and so there's a point where it's hey, you owe it to yourself. You got to figure out what it looks like for you to find that rest for you. If that's you activating medical leave, if that's you, using your savings, if that's you, negotiating some type of package, but because you have to be here, right? And to your point, it's why not? Why wouldn't I do that? In this landscape, I think going really to that, in this landscape, I think it can be argued that that the veneer of employer care has been stripped away, right? Layoffs are now kind of part of more of a business lever, as opposed to being this thing that was, again, when I'm coming out of college, coming out of school, I was told, hey, if layoffs happen, that means the company is in dire straits, Daisy. That means it's bad outside if there's layoffs. Now it's more, no, we had a moonshot, we didn't reach it, so now we're going to lay people off, and then we're going to go ahead and we're going to find these other people to help us hit our next 12 to 18 month moonshot. We're also seeing, and this is just anecdotally, because I'm talking to folks off mic that, in honor of just not divulging their names, but I'm having a lot of off the record conversations. I'm talking to CPOs, I'm talking to CDOs, chief people officers, chief diversity officers, who are saying, hey, not only are organizations not executing or honoring the commitments they made after the murder of George Floyd, but it's almost they're racing counter 180 to those commitments. So when I think about the role of a people leader today, the fact that they're dealing with a maybe the most disillusioned workforce ever, right? they're dealing with the most upside down economy in terms of, not upside down in terms of like, we're in like the market's crashing, whatever, but in terms of record profits, but people are not able to keep their jobs, or people are not able to get raises, or people, like whatever the case, like these things are not matching up. It would seem that burnout is inevitable, right? It's not like, so, oh, my bad. Hold on. Cause I'm thinking about, let me add some more, because it's, not only are these HR people dealing with a highly disillusioned workforce, employees,
Yes.
Right? They're dealing with a leadership team that's becoming increasingly ruthless in how they're thinking about delivering profits for their shareholders, be they publicly or privately held. And then on top of that, because the job landscape is so crazy. Side note, like I just saw a tweet, Daisy. Somebody said they got to the offer stage and the company said, we need you to verify your last 5 incomes, salaries. Like you give us your last 5 pay. So it's like these things are happening where the job market it's just harder to even get a job. So these HR leaders, these people leaders, they're stressed by their internal environment, and at the same time don't have the same ripcord that they may have had some years ago. It would seem that burnout is inevitable. And so, like, if that's the case, which I do believe that's the case, what advice would you give to people leaders in this climate? Because in so many ways, a lot of folks, if they're blessed enough and privileged enough to have a job, they're kind of just stuck. If I'm wrong, tell me.
I mean, listen, you're entitled to your opinion. I don't disagree that the system is set up to burn everybody out. So let's start with that. I don't disagree. It's not a this just happened. The Industrial Revolution happened a really long time ago, and we are living in the aftermath of it. And cost savings processes and initiatives have always existed. They've just been labeled differently. They've been called something different. But fundamentally, at the end of the day, organizations that do not protect their employees and at the very least communicate transparently what their goals and needs and interests are, will fail. I do fundamentally believe. I don't think it's a matter of companies should never conduct layoffs, right? That simply is just not feasible, especially given the economic conditions that we're in. But companies can do better at strategic planning so that they lay off less people, right? Companies can do better at communicating the purpose of layoffs and work, right? There's a lot that can be done on that side, but there's also a lot that can be done on our end, because to your point about, everything's structured to get burnout, I don't think burnout is inevitable.
Okay.
I think it can be if we do not take the steps to protect and take care of ourselves, right? There is the systemic changes that need to happen, and there are bodies of people who need to work on that, and who, right? And part of that, to your point around, the experience of employees right now, right? It is that I have a deep empathy and care, and this is why I write specifically for managers and leaders, because they are often, especially people managers, they're the ones that are in the middle, right? And they're like that frozen middle, and they are getting the unrelenting demands from the top, and they're getting the unrelenting demands from the bottom, and they still don't even know how to navigate their own spaces, right? Like that's the space that we're in, and that's a sure sign. Right, so that's a sure path to burnout, because if you do not create the practices and conditions for you to be able to navigate that as well as possible, and it doesn't mean that every day you're going to be able to take a full wellness break. You may not be able to every day, but how many practices do you put in place to be able to come back to yourself during the day, right? What does that look like in the morning, in the afternoon, and in the evening, right? And Burnt Out to Lit Up, I share even simple mantras of like, this is how I'm handling my morning. This is how I'm handling my afternoon. This is how I'm handling my evening, because I know how my energy flows throughout the day. And if I look at my calendar at the beginning of the day and I have 20 meetings and I'm going to have another thing is we have way too many meetings and we need to structure that
way
better.
too many.
Right? But if I look at that and I know my energy level is going to be lowest at this time of the day, what am I going to intentionally do to make sure that I am safeguarding my space? Am I able to, not everybody is, but am I able to block 5-10 minutes to just be silent, right? To just be quiet, not to go and catch up with my email, which is what we tend to do, right? Which continues to drive, our overdrive, right? And it's, and it just shakes up our nervous system, but to just come back to myself. What are the things that I can do? What are the things that I need to say and ask for so that I can be at my best for decision making, right? What are the triggers that push me to make the wrong decisions, to anticipate the wrong things, to be nasty to somebody that doesn't deserve my nastiness, because it's not about them. It's about the last meeting that I had. But unfortunately, you're the person that's in front of me now. I was like, and you bear the brunt of it, right? That's that intentionality. And so I talk a lot in Burnt Out to Lit Up about that piece of self-awareness, right? I ask a lot of questions. I provide a lot of scripts. You'll appreciate this as an HR professional, because that's a lot of what we do. And so at the end of each chapter, I provide scripts to help us reflect on the learnings from that chapter, and to hone them for yourself as a people manager, but also as an employee, right? How often are we afraid to ask our managers for the time and the space that we need? Or sometimes, how often are we afraid to go back to our managers and say, I think there's a solution here that could be helpful, and it could help both build productivity and also rest for the team. Right? I'm like, I've got a possible solution. Can we consider it? What does that look like? Right? How do I piece the words together so that I can do that, and so that I can show care for myself and others? That's the kind of ongoing practice that I believe we can engage in, and we have to do it because the system is not set up to protect us. And so we need to start by protecting ourselves, so that we can then change the system from, if we choose to, from within, or those who choose to from outside, right? There's multiple avenues, and I am for all of them.
Daisy, this has been a fire conversation. And the thing I love about I would say overarching thing I really appreciate about your approach is that, yes, you have the passion, and you have the empathy, and you have the lived experience. You also have the technical and business acumen paired with those things. So it comes across less like someone just speaking altruistically or optimistically or kind of just pie in the sky. There's some practical application tied to it where we know there's something that can be realized from it. So that's exciting to me. I'm excited about Burnt Out to Lit Up. I know that it's coming out in September.
Yes, September 18th.
September 18th. So we're going to make sure to put the link for pre-order in the show notes, and then, we'll do our thing and everything like that. Listen, before we let you go, right? We're coming up on, feels like, it feels like every election is the most important election, but we're coming up on election season. Tensions are incredibly high. We talked about at the top of this conversation, the very just divisive, politically charged rhetoric and vibes overall right now. Yep. Probably the highest I've experienced in my lifetime.
I think in our lifetime, our generation, yes. Obviously, our ancestors experienced a lot more.
1,000%. Yeah, but
for us, yes.
Yeah, for sure. So I was born in '89. So
you're a baby. I was born in '73.
That's hard. That's dope. Gen Xers, what's up? No, but I'm saying for me, I think about the 9/11 attacks, but I'm saying as walking around as an adult, this just feels like a much more heightened time. And I say all that to say, what advice would you give to senior executive, if you could give like 3 points of advice to senior executive people leaders on navigating and building a culture of not having folks burnt out, right? For what they're accountable for, what would they be?
I mean, the first one that I would say is that, a great leader calms their teams by role modeling the right behaviors. So the first thing that we need to do is really reflect and pause and ensure that we're role modeling the behaviors and the values that we believe to be important to not just calm ourselves, but to calm the entire organization's nervous system. I think a great leader communicates transparently and humbly and vulnerably, right? It's not about creating more division and using your pulpit, if you will, to tell people how they need to feel. It's about recognizing that many people are impacted in a very deeply personal level, and that regardless of our political beliefs, we come to organizations to align on delivering X and Y. And if we can keep people aligned on that with a sense of safety and acceptance and collaboration and professionalism, that's how we help to safeguard our people. It's that's our number, that's our number one responsibility. And then I'd say the third is it's that kind of reflection and that kind of modeling and that kind of calming the nervous systems requires us to be right within, right? To make sure that we are protecting and safeguarding ourselves first. It's that oxygen mask, right? We have to put it on ourselves first. And I think that we become these sad martyrs in this process sometimes, or we give up. And I don't think either is an option. I don't think putting my head in the sand is an option. And I don't think, telling everybody how much suffering I'm making and how hard I am is the answer either. It's about me finding that middle ground of, this is what I need to be able to be the best leader for you. And I'm willing to share this vulnerably, because my vulnerability does not diminish my leadership. It enhances it, right? That I'm able to do that. And I am here with you, right? My job is to get us to the other side safely. And you can count on me, because my behaviors have demonstrated that you can trust and respect me, right? That, I think those are the things that as leaders we should be focused on.
Daisy, I'm not sure how long you've listened to Living Corporate, but like, I'm about to break out something that I haven't broken out in a while. But like, when people come on the show and they drop bars at the end, I got to give them a little bit of, you know what I'm saying?
Oh, oh my gosh. I feel so cool right now.
I really appreciate you being a guest. I'm so glad that we were able to connect. And let's make sure to plug the book one more time.
Thank you.
Burnt out to lit up. Okay.
Yes, Burnt Out to Lit Up, how to reignite the joy of leading people. And you can pre-order it on Amazon, on Bookshop, Barnes & Noble. It is everywhere. And the lifeblood of a book is pre-order. So I just ask everybody to order before September 18th. And then let's start this conversation.
I love it. Daisy, we'll talk to you soon. Peace.
Thank you.
Living Corporate is a podcast by Living Corporate LLC. Our logo was designed by David Dawkins. Our theme music was produced by Ken Brown. Additional music production by Antoine Franklin for Musical Elevation. Post-production is handled by Jeremy Jackson. Got a topic suggestion? Email us at livingcorporatepodcast@gmail.com. You can find us online on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and living-corporate.com. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned.